first speaker is Robyn Cox, and I'm going to ask her to go ahead and come up here. The title of Robyn's talk is Dreams, Dolphins, and Diabetes. And she's been living with diabetes since age 13. Somehow she knew that it wasn't going to get in the way of her life and her dreams. She was a very active teenager before that and has remained active throughout her life. She now lives in Texas, is a wife and mother, has a sweet little 3-year-old. I often don't use those two phrases. She's a trainer to 14 wonderful whales and dolphins, and she says that her life is exactly how she's planned it thus far. So she's going to talk to us about how dreams come true even with diabetes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I am so excited to be here. It's my first time to San Francisco, and I've actually been here since Wednesday. Beautiful weather. I heard this morning for the last couple of days it's been about 45 and raining in San Antonio. So if there are days that you don't want to be working with dolphins and whales, those are a couple of them. So I'm very glad to be here. So excited to share my story. I wanted to start out with a little video that we did a couple of years ago now on D-Life TV. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but it gives a brief overview of kind of my story, and then I'll go into it a little bit further after the video.
Robyn Cox, trainer extraordinaire at SeaWorld in San Antonio. 3 to 6 times a day, she dances with beluga whales and white-sided dolphins to the delight of thousands. But there was a time when the applause and these creatures seemed out of reach. Robyn has lived with diabetes since she was 13. After getting her degree from the University of Texas, Arlington, and paying her dues at SeaWorld, including selling fish to customers to feed to the animals, she coveted an opportunity to become an animal trainer and performer. But to do that, she needed to demonstrate to the park's doctors that she could scuba dive safely.
Scuba diving is one of those things that you have to have your certification in order to get a job as an animal trainer. And there's a lot of places that will not certify diabetics.
Determined to prove herself, Robyn Cox went to work.
I got on the computer right away and searched about diabetics diving, and the particular doctor that I spoke with specialized in coming up with programs to actually make it safe for diabetics to dive.
She found a doctor who outlined a regimen for her that would ultimately prove she could reliably manage the demands of scuba diving and her diabetes.
I had to do certain things as far as eat a certain time before I dive, check my blood sugar multiple times before I dive, take less insulin before I dive, and just not go down for too long. Be willing to come up and check my blood sugar again to make sure I didn't go low. There's a lot of concerns with the temperature of the water here as well. It's much colder than if you were to go diving in Mexico or somewhere. So we had to make sure that the whole program was set up not only for a diabetic, but also a diabetic in colder water.
But even at that, SeaWorld doctors were still a little skeptical.
They were a little tentative as far as accepting the fact that I had diabetes and making it that I could dive. Obviously, if your blood sugars are low, if your blood sugars are even too high, it can be dangerous to scuba dive. So it made sense that he was a little skeptical about clearing me to dive. Can somebody make sure my air's turned on? Once I showed him how well controlled I was and how much preparedness went into me actually scuba diving, he was much more willing to let me dive.
Good call, Robyn.
When she first started training the animals more than 10 years ago, Robyn would change out of her wetsuit 4 times a day to inject herself.
Because our shows run so close together, a lot of times I wouldn't have time to get out of my wetsuit. I would have 30 minutes to eat, take my shot, and get out of my wetsuit.
Then, about a year ago, she had another life-changing moment.
My husband and I were thinking about starting a family, and I went to a new doctor, and he asked me if I had considered an insulin pump. I had never, because everyone said, well, you can't get in the water with a pump.
That's when Robyn's doctor told her about the Omnipod, an insulin pump that could safely go into the water tank with her.
I was a little skeptical at first, tried it out, and it actually stays on for 3 days. It's just connected to my back. You can hardly see it through my wetsuit, and now I don't have to worry about those injections.
Maybe the biggest testament to her success is that her immediate boss has never seen her affected by her diabetes.
Robyn's just like everyone else, does not stop her one bit. I never see her tired, although she probably is at times, some of the effects of the diabetes, but it just doesn't stop her. She said, okay, so I've got diabetes, I'm living with it, what do I have to do to go around this?
And there's always somebody not too far away to help remind her to keep on top of her routine.
Hi, Robyn.
That's her husband, Brian, who works at SeaWorld's Animal Care Department.
I had to learn a lot. I knew what diabetes was, but I wasn't up to speed on what the diet consisted of, so she's taught me a lot. How's your day going?
Good, how's your day?
Good, working hard?
If you're type 1 diabetic, it doesn't have to stop your life. Whatever you dream of, you can still accomplish that. I never would have guessed that this is where I would be. It's exactly where I wanted to be, but I never would have guessed that I would have been able to accomplish it. And I just set my mind to it, and I'm so glad I did, because it's been a great ride.
Thank you very much. Now, what I was going to try to do, and again, as I mentioned, I'm not in front of the computer very often, but I have some fun pictures just throughout my life and different things that I've been able to do with diabetes, because I think one of the great things about going around and speaking about what I do is to remind not only the kids, but the parents of the kids with diabetes that it is possible, that you don't want to put too many limits on what they can do and what their dreams might be, because if you have those limits, you're going to pass those limits on to the kids too, and there's so much that can be accomplished if you don't put diabetes in the way of that. Like I talked about, it was when I was 13 when I was diagnosed. I was an active teenager. I was very active in cheerleading, gymnastics. I did tumbling and jumping, all that kind of stuff. And one summer, my mom kind of noticed that all of a sudden that I couldn't get off the ground very easily. And she thought that was kind of weird, because I typically hadn't had any problems with it. But the jumping, the tumbling, it was all a little bit lower. She noticed I would come home from school and I would eat and eat and eat and eat, and then fall asleep. And I was still losing weight. So that was a little weird. I was thirsty all the time. I could drink all kinds of water and Cokes and stuff and still be thirsty. And she just noticed that something was wrong. We'd actually gone to dinner with a couple of friends for my 13th birthday, and before dinner even got to the table, I'd had like 3 Cokes, and she thought, that's weird. Sure is thirsty. So a couple of days later, we went to my aunt's house to actually celebrate my birthday and my cousin's birthday, and my mom was sitting around talking to my aunts and kind of explaining some of the things that she had seen. And I think she had that mama gut, because both of my aunts, my dad's sisters, were actually type 1 diabetics. And when they heard all those things that were going on, they immediately just kind of shook their heads and said, you know what, let's just see what happens. Let's test her blood sugar, see where it is. It's probably nothing, but it kind of sounds familiar. So they tested my blood sugar, and sure enough, it was pretty darn high. And the next couple of days, I went into the hospital. I was kind of confused at the time. I felt fine. You know, yes, I had no muscle. It was hard to get off the ground, but I felt okay. So I didn't really understand why I had to be in the hospital, because at 13, hospitals were for sick people, and I didn't feel sick. I knew I had diabetes, but you know, that wasn't that big of a deal, other than suddenly I have to give myself shots. But I could learn how to do that at home. So again, going to the hospital was a little hard. And at 13, all you want to be is just like everyone else. So I kind of decided at that point, you know what? I'm going to do my best to be just like everybody else. Yes, I have diabetes. Yes, I'm going to learn how to do this. But I'm going to do my best to go on to everything else that I had planned. my best friend and I at the time had already planned that we were going to be dolphin trainers. You know, sounds natural. I mean, why wouldn't anyone want to be a dolphin trainer? Well, that best friend, I love her to death. Still talk to her today, but she's a librarian now, I believe, in Canada. It's a great job. I mean, I think she really enjoys it. But it definitely a different way that she took. But you know, I went on and I went to cheerleading camp and I had my snacks and I knew where my insulin was and I had to make sure it stayed cool and I did everything that I could to keep going in that path. Eventually, a few years later, again, I found out I needed to be scuba certified in order to become a dolphin trainer. So I went and got my scuba certification.